Hello and welcome back. If you're a new listener, then welcome. My name is Megan and I've been a practicing witch since the early 2000s. If you're back for another episode, then welcome back. Come sit for a spell and join me round the cauldron to talk about witchcraft, paganism, and all things magic and mundane. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about discernment, sources, and making sure that you're not falling for bullshit. So grab some coffee, pull up a seat, and let's have a chat. Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Round the Cauldron. It has been a very long 2025 already, and it's just now the end of February. Obviously, there's so many things going on in the world, and a lot of us are just feeling it and exhausted and everything in between. So in today's episode, I want to talk about the importance of learning how to tell good information from bad information, fact from fiction and propaganda and marketing, and kind of how to think critically. I know a lot of people will say, oh, well, that's just common sense, but common sense is something that has to be taught. And if you have never been exposed to something that is going to make you think, or that you're unfamiliar with, just enough unfamiliar that you could fall for something, then this might be a little difficult for you. And not everybody has access to the types of material or exposure that you kind of need in certain situations to be able to gain the skills of discernment and critical thinking. I want to talk about, actually, the thing that made me think about this topic was a Facebook ad that I saw that kind of led me on a little bit of a search to see if this was actually something that people believed. And that is the idea that Rh negative blood makes you a witch. Now, if you don't know what Rh negative blood is, that's totally fine. The Rh factor is an antibody, leaning back into my anatomy and physiology classes. The Rh factor is basically the part of your blood type that gives you a positive or a negative. So Rh negative blood means that you don't have that particular antibody. You don't have the antibody for the Rh factor. Now, the claim was that Rh negative blood makes you a witch because it's rare. And I'm not going to get into all of that right now because actually I'm going to talk about it in just a little bit, but some other wild things that I have seen on the internet that make my head hurt is that you are born a witch and you either are or you're not, and you can't just learn how to be a witch and practice magic. That there is a right or wrong way to work magic. That the whole concept of light language, that might be, I don't know if that's controversial or not. Light language just makes me feel a certain way. I find it strange. And honestly, I don't know enough about light language to know anything about it, except for the fact that star seeds as they are right now as a concept is kind of rooted in racism. I'm not going to talk about that because maybe I will leave it for a different episode. It does tend to be a touchy subject when I bring it up. And something else that I see happening on the internet all the time is people sharing symbols and sigils and words without context. Like, this sigil means this. Put this sigil on your body to attract luck and abundance. But there's no context of how the sigil was created, who created the sigil, and people are blindly putting symbols of power on their bodies without looking into it further. Without just understanding the symbol and how it was made in overall by like a who and whatnot. So those are some things that I have seen online lately. I haven't been online as long as some other creators, but and another one that just off the top of my head is someone selling a course to teach you how to be a witch for thousands of dollars. Thousands of dollars. And don't get me wrong, courses are fantastic. Courses can teach you so many things that you might not have exposure to in the first place. But for someone to teach a course and charge thousands of dollars for an online, generally pre-recorded course is ridiculous to me. And I think it goes back to capitalism, of course. And Ysha, the activist witch, actually just had this whole thread on Blue Sky about courses and capitalism and whatnot. Which, if you're not following Ysha on Blue Sky and YouTube, you absolutely should. They're a fantastic creator, and they are so knowledgeable about so many things that even like I wouldn't even think of. Anyway, so let's define discernment. Let's talk about what discernment actually is. Putting it very simply, discernment is just the ability to judge something well. It's the ability to look at something and know whether or not you're being duped, or you're being lied to, or if you should be skeptical, or if you should believe whatever it is that you're looking at. And this is a skill. Like, this isn't something that everybody will automatically know how to do. And it sucks. But honestly, I have found that people who have a more academic background, people who have been exposed to different viewpoints and different research methods and whatnot, they're going to have a better handle on this skill than someone who doesn't have an academic background, or who doesn't have a college degree, or who wasn't able to participate well in their school for whatever reason. And I think it's very important for people to learn discernment, because that's how you prevent so many things. And some people are going to be naturally better at this than others. And that just goes along with any other skill. Some people are going to have to work harder to understand things. Some people are going to have to work harder to learn how to research properly or research well. And that's just the nature of it. But I'm here to help you. I'm here to guide you and hopefully help you learn some discernment if you struggle with that, or if you're great at discernment, then cool. Maybe I have some extra resources or ideas, and you will have to forgive me in this episode if I'm a little scatterbrained. I am tired. I am really struggling with my microbiology class, not because the material is hard, but because I keep finding mistakes in my professor's work and in her schedule and in the way she has things laid out. And it's exhausting. Anyway, so why is discernment important? One, it's going to help keep you from getting hurt. And I mean this in so many different ways. It can help keep you from ingesting something that you shouldn't be ingesting. It can help prevent you from using something that probably shouldn't be used in a certain way. I am thinking specifically right now about the malachite pleasure wand that was around a couple of years ago. Yes, discernment would come in handy there a lot. It also will help you not get duped by misinformation or intentional disinformation. I think those two words are different. I will probably use them interchangeably. it'll help keep you from being lied to, basically. It'll help you not get sucked into a cult and cultish behavior and a cultish mindset. And it's okay to be skeptical. Being skeptical is not a bad thing. It doesn't mean that you don't trust someone that you're talking to or a resource, for example. But when you have the capability of being skeptical, it leaves your mind open to change in case you're wrong. It also keeps you curious. Because if you're skeptical about something, but you're interested in it enough, then you're gonna try to figure out the correct answer or what's right and what's wrong. The main key with discernment is that it's okay to question everything, and you should question everything. Just because someone on the internet says it's true doesn't mean it's true. Just because a well-known author wrote it in a book doesn't mean it's accurate or doesn't mean that it's good information. Not everyone has good intentions. And while the majority of people in the spiritual community does, you will find grifters. You will find people who just want your money and who will do whatever they can to get your money in whatever way possible. And yes, that is going back to people who will sell courses for thousands of dollars. And I want to make it clear that I don't think it's a bad thing for a witch to sell their services, but I do think that harm is done when a witch is selling their services for the sole purpose of making a bunch of money rather than uplifting and helping the community that they are selling their services to. You know? Like, don't get me wrong, we do live in a capitalist world and we do have to have money to survive, but there's like an ethical way to go about doing that, selling courses and offering services. Anyway, I'm getting off track. So now that we know what discernment is and why it's important to have discernment and understand how to be discerning, let's talk about some things that you can use in your discernment journey, we'll say. So, the first one I'm just going to mention briefly because I have done an entire YouTube video about it, and that is the CRAP test. And I know it's a funny name, but it makes it memorable. It's CRAAP, and it stands for currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. And this is something that can be used when evaluating a source of information. For example, I have a book here in front of me that I'm reading called Women of the Dawn by Bunny McBride. And this book is about 4 different Wabanaki women in Maine from the time of colonialism and colonization. So breaking down this book, we'll look at each of these points. The first one is currency. So when you are looking at a book, you'll want to look at when it was written. How current is the information? And this book was written in, 1999. So this book was written almost 20 years ago at this point. Then, okay, so we know how current it is. We know how old the book is. Then we want to look at relevance. Relevance is going to be subjective. And that basically means that is the information relevant to what you want to know? For me, this book is relevant because one of my major goals for 2025 is to learn more about Maine's history, especially as it relates to colonization and colonialism and the land that I live on and the people who have stewarded this land for hundreds and hundreds of years. So this is relevant to me because it details the lives of 4 different Wabanaki women who are important in history for one reason or another. The third point is authority. So then you're going to want to look at who the source is coming from or what the source is coming from. In this case, with a book, you're going to want to look at the author and even potentially the publisher. So the author of this book is Bunny McBride. I don't know too much about Bunny McBride, if I'm being completely honest. If I'm not mistaken, she is a historian. Oh, no, here we go. In the dust cover of the book, it says that Bunny McBride has a master's in anthropology, and she is an adjunct lecturer in anthropology at Kansas State University and Principia College. Of course, this was written in 1999, so that could probably have changed as far as her teaching goes, but she has a master's in anthropology. So with her education, she is likely a good source for historical information that is presented in this particular context. As far as the publisher goes, it was, this says University of Nebraska Press, Lincoln, and London. So this comes from an academic source, I guess you could say. It also is currently housed in the Maine State Library, and I found this book recommendation on the website for one of the museums here in Maine that is specifically about Indigenous history. So all of those put together, the authority that all of those people have to be sharing this information is likely to be good, likely to be accurate. The next point is accuracy. Is the information accurate? Now, again, this is going to be subjective because if you are looking at history, we know that history is written by the winners. And sometimes the information isn't entirely accurate. So far, the information that I have found in this book tends to be accurate to the best of my knowledge. But accuracy is a very important part of the puzzle when looking at sources and using your discernment skills. Taking it with a different example, if you are reading a book about shadow work, for example, I would expect that when discussing the history of shadow work, the author would say that it basically comes from Carl Jung, a psychoanalyst. If it says anything different than that, then you will want to double check that information because Carl Jung is considered by everybody, I'm pretty sure, to be the father of shadow work because it encompasses all of his different ideas. So that's just another example. The last letter is P for purpose. This one is important, and not just when it comes to books. It's very important to know the source's purpose because if someone is telling you information, if someone is teaching you something or just sharing knowledge with you, they generally have a purpose, right? So like my purpose here doing this podcast is to share what I know and help people if I can possibly help people. I absolutely love getting online or in front of a camera or sitting here in front of my microphone, talking to everyone and helping people if I possibly can. Research is one of my favorite things to do, and I love putting puzzles together. Like, oh my gosh, we're doing case studies in microbiology right now, and I absolutely am having so much fun putting together all of the pieces with the patients and the symptoms and what I already know versus what information I need to figure out the answer. That is my bread and butter, and I love doing it so much. And putting that on the other side with research, I tend to think that I'm pretty good at finding information that a lot of people might not understand how to get if they've never done it before. For example, In the Spellsate forum, someone had posted about a shop that they found that they were looking for advice and experience if anyone has purchased anything from that shop before. And if it was even a reputable shop or if it was just one of these drop shippers or scammers or whatever. So I said, just a second, I'll be right back. Let me go do some digging. And I was able to find that the shop's privacy policy and terms and conditions and refund policy were all templates that hadn't been completely filled in yet. The images on the t-shirts were photoshopped and they looked like AI. What else did I find? I couldn't find exactly where they were based, and that was just confusing on all parts because they had an Etsy that said they were based in California, but then their own website in the privacy policy or whatever said that they were beholden to the laws of New Zealand. So that's a fun thing. And I also couldn't find information about their business, whether they were registered in California or registered in New Zealand, if they were even registered at all, because not everybody is. Some people are sole proprietors and don't have a registration or whatever. But all of these red flags helped me help this person save their money and not get scammed by fake or subpar products from a store that is selling things to witches, you know. Everyone has a reason for doing something. The purpose of information is important because if they are sharing information with you and they are selling products and selling courses, for example, then they might only share bits and pieces of the knowledge with you and then turn around and say like, oh, I have this course if you want to learn more about it. You know, this is a common thing that I have found when people are hosting like free webinars or free courses online or whatever. They will host the free course and they will give you just a little bit of a taste of the information. And then at the end of whatever course they're hosting online, they will say, oh, by the way, I have a sale on this course, which is the next part of this information if you want to learn more. It's a hook to get you into it. Understanding the purpose, once again, can help you know if that's something that's going on. If they're selling something to you, then you may want to be a little more skeptical. If they are just looking to share information with you, then that's fine. If they are an academic and they're sharing information with you, then generally the information is going to be a little more trustworthy depending on the person. So that's the crap test. I spoke more about that than I thought that I would. If you want to learn more about the crap test, the video is on YouTube. I'll leave a link in the show notes too for anybody who wants to watch it and learn more. Because we have another model to talk about, and this is the bite model. The bite model is to help you avoid cults and cultish behavior. I don't have a vast amount of knowledge on the bite model. I know generally what it is, but there is going to be a link in the show notes for anyone who would like to learn more about the bite model and how everything sort of works together. Because the BITE model also, BITE is an acronym, it stands for behavior, information, thought, and emotion. And all of these things have the word control at the end of them. Behavior, control. Information, control. Thought, control, and emotional control. If you are in a group of people and things are going on, it's very possible for any of these particular points to happen. So an example of behavior control would be, I'm trying to think of a religious example or a spiritual example that doesn't just fall back onto evangelical Christianity, but I can't. So we're just going to run with that. Behavior control is essentially exactly what it sounds like. The group or the leader is doing whatever they can to control your behavior, whether they are leading with fear, whether you will be punished for doing a certain behavior or punished for not doing a certain behavior. So learning more about the bite model, sorry, my brain just kind of went blank. Learning more about the bite model will help you avoid cultish behavior. And you have to take it all into context at once, because someone trying to control your behavior isn't necessarily a leader of a cult. You know, I sometimes try to control my child's behavior, but that's because I'm her mother and I'm not a leader of a cult. I am teaching her right from wrong and how to do things for herself or whatever. Information control is an interesting one, because this involves how you get your information and what information you have access to. The one thing that comes to my mind is, are you allowed to ask questions? And if so, are you given actual answers? So if you go to a leader of a group, for example, and you say, well, I have a question about this. And their answer is something like, well, you just have to trust me. Or put your faith in this thing over here. Or where did you get that information? That's not a good source of information. We're going to look at this information over here. And information control can happen online so fast and we don't even realize it. And it's not necessarily because it's a cult. I think it has more to do with algorithms and interacting with information and algorithms, learning what will hold your attention so they feed you more of it. Anyway, go check out the link in the show notes if you would like to learn more about the bite model. I will also try to find some good videos, maybe some podcasts that go into more detail with the bite model, because I don't want to sit here in front of the microphone and talk about something that I don't know enough about. I do know that bite model is for cults. I do know that the purpose is to control these specific things, but there are examples in the sources that I will share with you that do a better job than I'm doing right now, because I am losing brain power. All right, let's move on. Maybe I can recover some semblance of coherence. For discernment, you're also going to want to check other sources. There's usually no getting around that. You will want to cross-reference and cross-check the information you have with other sources of information that are also valid or valuable or accurate. This is important because it keeps you from getting sucked into an echo chamber of people sharing the same information over and over again, and nothing really changes and growth doesn't really happen. It's also possible that information is just wrong in one source versus another. Cross-checking your information doesn't just happen with books, right? You don't just read a book and then go to another book to cross-check that information. You can. You absolutely can. But there are so many different sources open and available to you that you can use. Cross-checking what you learn with other sources can do two things. One, it can verify that the information is accurate and that you don't have to change anything or do anything else. Or it can lead to more questions, and you might find out that the information you received initially is wrong or incomplete. And then that can lead you to more sources to learn more information and finally get an accurate picture eventually once you're done looking at all of your sources. And sources aren't just books. I want to make that pretty clear. The witchcraft community has a habit of recommending books over anything else. Books are important. You have to learn from books. But books aren't the only source of information. And you also shouldn't be just consuming witchcraft content. Intersectionality is important when it comes to the information that you are learning or that you're consuming, the content that you're consuming. Intersectionality just means that you are looking at the subject from many different points of view. For example, if you are looking at green witchcraft, using herbs in your practice, that's great. Working with herbs is fantastic. But if you're only looking at those herbs from a witchcraft perspective, you are missing so much about that particular plant, because it's also going to be important to understand how to handle specific herbs properly, what to do if you ingest them and you shouldn't have. Understanding how they grow is also important. Crystals too, for example. Understanding the basic geology of a crystal can help keep you from hurting yourself. I mentioned earlier the malachite pleasure wand, right? Malachite is not something that you should be putting in your body whatsoever. At all. No, don't do it. It has a lot of copper in it, and the acidity, if you have a vagina, the acidity of the vagina can actually interact with the crystal and can do harm. That doesn't sound very fun. Doesn't sound very pleasurable in the long run. And outside of the pleasure wand, people put crystals in their water, which if your crystal isn't porous and has a very basic structure to it, then generally that'll be okay. But take pyrite, for example. If you put pyrite in water and you let it sit for however long, your water becomes acidic because the pyrite reacts with the water and creates sulfuric acid. So don't drink it, don't consume water that crystals have sat in. Selenite is another example. Selenite is very low on the Mohs hardness scale, meaning that it is porous and it can flake off. And it can dissolve in water. So that's another crystal that you don't want to put in water. Another example of intersectionality that's really important is history. If you are exploring a practice that is based in a culture that is not your own, it is vital that you understand the history of that particular culture. You don't have to become a historian in the culture, but understanding important events and the current culture is so important. Because then when you read the mythology, when you read the stories and learn about the gods and the different magical practices, you'll have more context to understand things in a better way. The example I always go back to is when I was reading the Tanbo Kunya and learning about, in the first part of this story, the king and queen are basically arguing with each other while they're laying in bed about who is more wealthy and if they are on equal ground. And at the center of this story is a bull, a cow. And if I didn't understand already that historically cattle were extremely important to the Irish people, and they were basically a measure of the wealth of a family, then this would seem ridiculous, right? They're fighting over who's rich enough or whatever, and then they're literally going to war over a cow. It sounds silly until you understand the context behind it. And the same goes for every other culture. Every people that has a mythology has context behind the mythology that's important to understand. And I'll just leave it at that. Actually, no, I won't, because a lot of these cultures are still living cultures, like Ireland, for example. Irish culture is still very much alive, and understanding the current climate in Ireland, Northern Ireland versus the Republic of Ireland, like, it's all important to understanding the history of Ireland and understanding the mythology of the country. It's all important. Okay. When we're going to move on. When you check your sources, this goes back to the crap method, kind of. You'll want to understand that all of your sources are going to have some sort of bias. It is almost impossible to write about something or share information without interjecting your own bias in it, even if you don't realize it. It's very difficult for people to stay neutral about a subject. And that's just human nature. But once you understand that people have bias in what they're sharing, then it makes judging the source of information easier. For example, in a mundane example, with everything that's going on right now in the United States with RFK Jr. and the Department of Health and Human Services, and the stance that they potentially, supposedly, most likely, have on vaccinations, is it, oh God, how do I say this? The subject came up in my microbiology class because we're learning about bacteria and viruses and fungi and protozoa that can do real harm to people, and the importance of vaccines. And my microbiology professor talked about it. She obviously didn't get into the politics because she's a professor and she probably can't. But she talked about how she keeps birds. And right now, the avian flu is a real problem in the United States. And so she is finding herself being extremely cautious with her birds and coming to class, because if her birds get it, she obviously doesn't want to spread it. She obviously also doesn't want her birds to get the avian flu and die. But she expressed extreme concern with the current administration's opinions and views on vaccinations. Knowing that my microbiology professor has been a microbiologist for more than 30 years, and she has a vast understanding of microorganisms and the way that they work, makes her a very valuable and accurate source when it comes to information such as bacteria, viruses, and diseases and vaccines. She will also be biased because of her education, and she will likely, because we didn't have this conversation, but she will likely not be able to understand why someone would choose not to vaccinate, in the same way that I don't understand why someone chooses not to vaccinate. My understanding of vaccines comes from my education on how they work and what they do and how they're made. Like, I know the basics, pretty much, of all of that. Your average person is just going to see a needle and a solution inside of the needle that is going to go into their body, and then they don't know what happens after that. Something happens with the immune system, and then they can't get that illness anymore, or if they do get that illness, their body already knows how to fight it off. So that's a mundane example of bias when it comes to sources of information. A magical example, the very first one that came to my mind when I was making my notes, is it's the book Witch by Lisa Lister. In this book, She shares some anti-trans sentiments, and her writing is very womb-centric, very focused on feminine energy and the female reproductive system. In this particular case, it is likely that any other writing by Lisa Lister will share those same sentiments. Her bias is that women are women and she doesn't write for trans people, and her womb is powerful, and she uses the word pussy a lot in her writing. That sounds very vulgar coming out of my mouth. I do apologize. But her sources, or her Lisa Lister as a source, is going to have that particular bias. As a general note, when it comes to looking at the biases of sources and people, understanding the context of that source is important. Older books, older sources of information are naturally going to be less inclusive than newer books. They're going to be less politically correct, I'll say, for lack of a better phrase. This is because of the time frame they were written in. It is generally unfair to hold someone accountable for something that they have said or done in the past if they have shown growth. Now, obviously, this is pretty nuanced, and it's going to depend on who it is and what happened, what they said and what they did, etc., and the growth that they've shown. But using your best judgment is going to come into play there. It's not, on Twitter a couple years ago, there were people sharing book blacklists, like you shouldn't read this book because of this, or you shouldn't read this book because of this. And there were books on there that were old, and people were saying don't read it because it isn't inclusive of the queer community, or don't read it because it is white-centric or whatever. And they're holding old books to the current idea of what is correct, the current understanding, not idea, the current understanding of what is proper. And don't get me wrong, I don't like when books are not inclusive and when books exclude people. They leave people out on purpose. But you have to take into account the history and the time period that those books were written. Because while it's not good, it's not the proper way, it does make sense when you look at it from a historical perspective. So that's just a general note. People are allowed to grow, and people make mistakes, and people say and do some stupid stuff. But understanding the historical context is pretty important. Another skill that I think is really valuable for discernment is learning how to break things down into their parts and understanding why things are done the way they are. Because once you understand the purpose of a piece of information, it's easier to judge the quality of the information and the accuracy of the source. And Hearthwitch actually just had a video come out recently where she discussed advanced magic, advanced witchcraft. And towards the end of that video, she completely broke down a spell from a spell book into its parts and went over why the author probably did things a certain way, and what you could do instead if you didn't have access, or if you're if you were physically limited in your capacity for movement. This is so important, not just in witchcraft spaces, but outside of witchcraft spaces. Because, again, once you understand why something is done the way it is and understand the parts of the information, then it is easier, to see things for what they are. And then it becomes easier to put them into context of the bigger picture. Okay. I do have an example of that, but the one example for the bigger picture that comes to my mind is political, and people don't like when I talk about politics. So yeah, maybe I'll write a blog post about that, and then people can choose to read it if they want to, instead of being smacked with it in the middle of a podcast. Anyway, and lastly, learn to ask why. Just in general, why are things done this way? Why is this information presented like this, but that information is presented in a different way? Why do they use this word instead of this word? In the book that I'm reading, the book was written in 1999. They do not use the word indigenous. They do not always use the word Native American. They use the word Indian because in the context of the time when the book was written, that's the word that everyone used. I know why they use that word, and it helps me to understand, no, they're not being jerks. They're using the language of the time, you know? And when you can ask why, it opens up channels of communication with people that you're talking to, and it can give you insight into if the person you're speaking with actually understands what they're saying, or if they're just repeating information that they have heard. Why do we visualize roots and a tree when we're grounding? Why do we do that? Why is that one of the most popular ways or most common ways of grounding your energy? Why do we stir clockwise? Why do we charge things under the light of the full moon? Why is it not a good idea to use white sage? If people are just spouting these things off to you, yes, we don't use white sage. Yes, we charge things under the full moon. But they can't tell you why when you ask, then they probably don't understand what they're doing or why they're doing it in the first place. They just know either this is just what people do or it's what works. And sometimes, depending on what you're looking at, that particular answer is good enough. It just works. Sometimes, not always. There's a few times when that's an acceptable answer from a person that you're talking to. Because personal practices are personal practices, you know? And when you learn to ask why, and you ask people why, it can help you understand the purposes of them sharing the information. Because if you ask someone why and they get upset that you're questioning them, they're probably not a good source of information, or they are too high up there on their high horse that you probably just don't even want to interact with them anyway. So just to go over, just to refresh your memory, because I've been talking for a long time and it's been kind of everywhere, I feel like. Methods that you can use for discernment: the crap test, the bite model, cross-checking your sources, understanding the purpose of information, understanding intersectionality, so going to more than one type of source, understanding the biases that people have in sharing information, breaking down things into their parts, and understanding why and asking why. So now that we've gone over that, I want to break down some of the claims that I have seen and some things that I mentioned at the beginning of this episode. The first one is that there is such a thing as witch blood. There is no such thing as witch blood. You are not born a witch. You don't just exist as a witch. You can learn to be a witch. And utilizing magic is a skill that you can learn. And like any other skill, some people are going to be better at it right from the start than others. Some people will have to put in more work than others, and that is natural. But you are not born a witch. Everyone's blood is made up of the same basic parts, unless you have like some sort of illness that affects your blood. But blood is blood is blood is blood. Okay? Anyone who tells you that you have to be born a witch or that you have to be initiated into a very specific lineage is feeding you full of crap. Witch blood isn't a thing from a witchcraft perspective, but also from a scientific one. And speaking of blood, let's talk about this Rh negative blood thing, that Rh negative blood makes you a witch. The reason for this claim that I saw was because Rh negative blood is rare. And it's rare for a reason. Going to the intersectionality portion of using your discernment, understanding what Rh negative blood is going to be important. And when you understand what it is, then you will understand why it's rare. So Rh negative blood means that you do not have the Rh antigen or antibody. You don't have the Rh antibody on your red blood cells. Not everyone does. Some people do. And if you have that, then your blood is positive. For example, my blood type, for anybody who wants to know, I don't even know if this is sharing too much information. My blood type is positive. So I have the Rh antibody. Rh negative blood presents a problem in pregnancy. And if the mother has Rh negative blood and the father has Rh positive blood, there is the potential for the child, for the fetus, to have Rh positive blood. Now, if you know anything about blood typing, you will know that you have to have a very specific match with your blood type if you get a transfusion. Rh negative blood and Rh positive blood generally don't mix. So, if a fetus has a positive blood type and the mother has a negative blood type, and it's not caught and not treated, it can actually lead to something called hemolytic disease of the fetus. Hemolytic, I think that's what it's called. Hemolytic disease of the fetus. And that is generally a problem in a second pregnancy, not a first pregnancy. And the reason for this is because in the first pregnancy, the mother's blood will be exposed to the fetus's blood, the Rh positive. That, in turn, can cause the mother's blood to learn how to fight off the Rh antibody, right? Because they don't mix. I am struggling with the antibody antigen thing right now. So if I need to make a correction to that, I will do so in the show notes. I constantly get them mixed up when it comes to what you have versus what you create. So anyway, if that happens in the first pregnancy, the fetus is generally fine. There isn't an issue. It comes when there is a second pregnancy and the fetus has a positive blood type, because then the mother's blood recognizes the fetus's blood as a foreign invader and will then proceed to attack the blood of the fetus. That is when it becomes a problem. Now, having Rh negative blood is rare because up until modern medicine, people with Rh negative blood generally didn't survive. And not necessarily that it was the Rh negative blood that made them not survive, but it was this whole thing of the blood types just not liking each other, pretty much, and causing issues in pregnancy. So naturally, Rh negative blood is going to be more rare. For Rh negative blood to be passed on, it's a recessive gene. So father and mother both have to be negative in their blood type. That also plays a role in its rarity. Just like blue eyes and green eyes, those traits are recessive and they have to be passed on from both sets of chromosomes in order for the fetus to display those particular eye colors. In modern medicine, with the Rh blood issue, they now have something called a RhoGAM shot. And essentially, this is given to women when they're pregnant if they have Rh negative blood. And it basically causes the, oh God, how do I explain this in a way that makes sense? The contents of the shot monitor the bloodstream for blood and antibodies from the fetus. And they take care of the fetus's blood so that mom's blood doesn't even have a chance to develop the antibodies to fight against it, if that makes sense. They're like the guards. I feel like I completely messed up this whole explanation of Rh negative blood. If anybody wants to learn more about it, I'll leave links in the show notes. But my point still stands. There is a scientific explanation for the rarity of Rh negative blood, and it has nothing to do with witchcraft and everything to do with genetics and science. So the next thing that I have on my list here to break down as a claim is that magic only works one way. While you may have a belief of the way magic works for you, there is literally no way of proving this and proving that magic only works in very specific ways. And there are traditions literally all over the world who do things differently, and they all get results in their own way. So yeah, there is no one correct way to work magic. It's just, you can't prove it, and there's no sense in arguing about it. If one way works for you and it doesn't work for someone else, then it just doesn't. This next one, I just want to say to stop doing. Stop putting random sigils and symbols on your body or on your person or wherever that you see on the internet without knowing more about them. You can go onto Pinterest, for example, and search a sigil for prosperity and come across hundreds of symbols and sigils. But they have no context, right? If you believe that magic works and that symbols and sigils hold power, then the creation of those particular symbols and sigils is important. The creation holds power for the reason they were created. Unless you are the person who created the sigil, you are never truly going to know if the sigil you're using is for whatever it says it is. Now, obviously, there are people online who share sigils that are trustworthy, that have garnered the trust of the community enough that people at least expect those sigils and symbols that are shared by those people, that they're going to be for what it says. For example, Laura Tempest Zakroff shares the sigils all the time and has a pretty good reputation in the community for being a trustworthy person. There's also someone that I used to follow on Instagram when I had Instagram. I think it's Blood Moon Bruja. Oh God, I don't even remember. But she would share sigils and creations all the time and would also go over the process of creating them. That person has garnered the trust of the community enough that people trust the symbols and sigils that they share. It is so important to understand the sigils and symbols that you use if you believe that they hold power. Because I can sit here and I can create a sigil for sickness and tell you that it's a sigil for prosperity. And if you trusted me with that sigil, then you could put that on yourself and you could get sick. Because that's what I created it for. Would I ever do that? Absolutely not. But are there people out there who will do that? Maybe. I don't know. And that's the point. The last thing that I want to talk about is potentially controversial in a lot of witchcraft spaces. And that is this idea that intention is everything and intention is all that matters. Your intention is important, true, but nothing is going to happen if you just intend it to. Nothing. I can sit here and say, I have the intention of writing my notes for school. But unless I actually do something, nothing's going to happen. Action is just as important when it comes to your witchcraft. No, you don't have to use supplies. You don't have to use a candle and combine a bunch of herbs and burn stuff in a cauldron. That's not entirely necessary. You can work magic with just yourself when you understand how to work with the energies around you. But the act of working with those energies is an action, not just sitting in place and wishing over and over again for something to happen. That's not going to be accurate, nor do I think it's going to produce results. This can be a hard thing to learn. Sorry, I'm trying to remember where I read this that I'm about to say. I can't remember right now, but if I do remember, then I will definitely make a note of it somewhere. When you're first beginning your magical practice, even if you are just sitting and putting your intention out into the universe, you are generally going to be pretty stoked and pretty excited about what you're doing and will naturally put your energy behind the spell, even if you don't understand that that's what you're doing. Even if you don't understand that you are working with energy and not just sitting there putting thoughts out into the universe. So your first couple of spells that you do like this might manifest. They might work. Actually, I think I heard this in Hearth Witch's video. I think that's where I heard this. She spoke about this. So your first spells, when you're all gung-ho about witchcraft, everything is going to work great and everything is going to manifest because you're unknowingly working with the energies around you, or you're working with your own energy. But as that excitement, as the honeymoon phase of your witchcraft practice sort of wanes and it becomes more normalized for you, your spells might stop working if all you've been doing is sitting and putting your intentions into the world, because you have stopped putting your energy behind them because you didn't even realize that's what you were doing in the first place. So all of that to say that your intention is absolutely important, 100%. But it's not the only thing that is necessary for working successful magic, period. The only thing that I can think of that might make this not true is if you approach magic from the psychological model, and that is that it's basically all in your mind. And so sitting there and repeating your intentions over and over and visualizing what you want to happen before it happens, that could potentially produce results if you approach witchcraft and magic from a psychological perspective. I don't believe that that is how witchcraft and magic work. So that's generally why I don't speak about it. But you have to do more than just intend for something to happen. You can't cast a spell to get a job and then not fill out job applications. It's kind of the same concept. So that is all I have for you today. Thank you for sticking around. Thank you for being here and listening. If you want to leave comments or you have anything to say about anything that I have said in this episode, please feel free to email me at hello@roundthecauldron.com. If you listen on Spotify, I think Spotify lets you comment now. If you listen on YouTube, you can leave a comment on YouTube. Follow me on Blue Sky if that's something you want to do. Subscribe to the podcast and the YouTube channel. And sign up for my newsletter if you would like. I send out a newsletter once a week. Unless I'm tired, then I might skip a week like I did recently. I send out a newsletter at least once a week with a little personal letter and a lunar forecast for the week, a divination for the week, anything that I have done new, such as blog posts and videos and podcasts and whatnot. And I also give away a monthly tarot reading once a month to a random subscriber who clicks a link in my newsletter. I don't think that people read all the way to the bottom of my newsletter. Otherwise, I would likely have more people entering. But yes, do all of that if you would like to do all of that. And I will talk to you later. Bye for now.